All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to break down something that is, let's be honest, absolutely essential for every teacher. Figuring out how to navigate the system of supports to get our students the help they really need to succeed. So, let's dive right in. We've all been there, right? You've got a student in your class, you can see they're falling behind, and you just know that with the right kind of support, they could totally thrive. But the path to actually getting that support, it can feel, well, a little complicated, maybe even overwhelming. So where do you even begin? That's the exact map we're going to lay out for you today. So here's our game plan. We're going to walk through 5 key parts of this journey. We'll start with the foundation, which is MTSS. Then we'll talk about climbing the different tiers of support. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the paperwork with the request for assistance. We'll also look at the really specific pathway for our English language learners. And finally, we'll walk the path that leads to an exceptional student education, or ESE evaluation. Okay, first things first. Let's start at the very beginning. What in the world is MTSS? Well, think of it as the entire system that holds up everything we do to support our students. Okay, so MTSS. You might hear this acronym and think it's just a bunch of hoops to jump through to get to ESE. But that's not what it's about at all. It stands for Multi-Tiered System of Supports, and it's a proactive framework that is all about using data to solve problems. Its whole purpose is to figure out if our teaching is working and to speed up learning for every single student. It's really about problem solving, not just finding a label. The whole thing really boils down to this really smart 4-step cycle. First, you define the goal. Be super specific, like the student will read 60 words per minute with 95% accuracy. Then you identify why that's not happening using your data. Step 3, you develop a solid plan, something with evidence-based strategies, like maybe 20 minutes of small group phonics 3 times a week. And finally, and this is key, you constantly evaluate their progress with more data. Is the plan working? It's this continuous loop of support. Okay, so now let's talk about how this support is actually structured. This is where the tiers come in. This table is super helpful because it lays everything out so clearly. Think of it like a ladder of support. Tier 1, that's your great core instruction for all students. And you use things like iReady or FA assessments to check the pulse on how everyone's doing. Now, for some students who need a bit more, you add Tier 2. This is targeted small group help. And the keywords there are in addition to Tier 1, not instead of it. If that's still not quite closing the gap, a student might need Tier 3, which is even more intensive and really individualized. Okay, this is so important. Deciding to move a student from Tier 2 to Tier 3, it's not a gut feeling thing at all. It is a decision driven completely by data. When your progress monitoring shows that a student's learning is still falling way behind their peers, even with that targeted help, that's the trigger. The team gets back together, they lay out all the numbers, and they decide if it's time for more intensive support. So, once you have that solid data and the whole team is on board, it's time to make things official. This brings us to the Request for Assistance, or the RFA. This is the big one. This is where you make that formal request. Form FM 7073, that's the one. This is the document you'll use to officially present your case to the school's support team. It's basically the story of your whole problem-solving journey, and it's backed up by all that data you've been collecting. I like to think of the RFA as your data storybook. You can't just write, this student is struggling. Nope, you have to show it. That means you've got to have your Tier 1 and Tier 2 data. You have to note the exact intervention you used, how often, for how long. And this is non-negotiable. You have to attach charts and graphs that visually show the student's progress over time. And hey, if it's a behavior concern, you need objective data for that too. Data, data, data. It's everything here. Now, let's throw a wrench in things. What if your student is an English language learner? Well, this adds a really important layer to the whole process, and there's a very specific path we have to take. So, before we can even think about a potential disability, we absolutely have to rule out language as the main barrier. That's what the Language Proficiency Dominance Screening, or LPDS, is for. This assessment is so critical because it helps the team figure out if a student's struggles are just a normal part of learning a new language or if there might be something else going on underneath. And here's where it gets a little nuanced. The rules for that referral actually change depending on how long the student has been in the ESOL program. See, for a student with less than 2 years in the program, we're looking at their grades in their home language arts class. But for a student who's been in the program for more than 2 years, the focus shifts to how they're doing in their English-based classes, and you have to prove you've already been trying appropriate interventions. It's a subtle distinction, but it makes a lot of sense. Okay, deep breath. You've gone through the tiers, you've filled out the RFA with all your amazing data, you've thought about any language factors. Now what? Let's walk through those final steps on the path to an ESE evaluation. All right, this is it, the final stretch of the map. After that RFA goes in, the whole process is about taking careful, deliberate steps and keeping parents involved the whole time. We start with getting consent for basic vision and hearing screenings, to rule out the simple stuff. If that's all clear, the parent then has to give a totally separate, informed consent for a full psychoeducational evaluation. Only then does the school psychologist get started. And the whole thing comes to a head in the eligibility meeting, where the entire team, parents included, sits down together to go over the results and decide what happens next. And you know what else is really important? The timeline. There's a clock on this. The second the school gets that signed parental consent for the evaluation, that's Form FM 4961, a 60-day clock starts ticking. The entire evaluation has to get done within that window. Just keep in mind that big school breaks like winter or summer break don't count towards those days. It's all to make sure the process keeps moving forward for the student. With all these forms and tiers and data points, it can be easy to lose sight of the big picture. So let's just zoom out for a second. This whole entire framework, from your everyday Tier 1 teaching all the way to a full evaluation, it's not about finding a label to stick on a kid. It's about a relentless, focused, data-driven mission to help every single student reach their potential. It's about support, not just identification. So as we close this out, I want you to hold on to that idea of this process being a map. It has clear routes, it has signposts, it has steps you can follow. But remember, the map itself isn't the destination. The destination is always, always student success. So the real question for all of us is, how are we going to use this map to navigate the unique journey of each and every child in our classroom?